Thanks to the Institute for having us as guests. I'll start off with just kind of a quick overview of the agenda we'll be covering today. So we've been asked to talk about the IT sector, specifically in Armenia, and more specifically, what can the diaspora do, or diaspora private sector do to help the development of the IT sector in Armenia. So the main topics we'll be kind of going over today are what opportunities exist for the diaspora companies or tech companies in general in Armenia. What are the current gaps in the IT ecosystem in Armenia, and what can the Armenian government do to close those gaps? What role can the private sector play? And private sector does not have to be necessarily only Armenian-owned companies, but in general. We want to also talk a little bit about the bright spots that we've seen in the Armenia ecosystem. And then we want to close it off with what can you, all of you audience members who are passionate about this, what can you do? So we'll get some ideas from our panel. So with that, let's go ahead and start with kind of the first question. Vahe, maybe you can start with this. We just got back from Armenia. Tell us a little bit about what you see as far as opportunities for private sector companies, either here or anywhere outside of Armenia, in Armenia. What do you see as opportunities?
Sure, thanks. I think the biggest opportunity that exists is there's a pretty deep well of technical talent, particularly on the engineering side, that is just hungry and looking for opportunities. And if you look at the challenges tech companies have, generally speaking, at the top of the list is just finding qualified engineers. So that was certainly kind of the case for us. And so, you know, in our case, we were able to find like 10 senior engineers within a matter of a couple of months, which was something that we weren't able to do in the US or in Russia, which was our other kind of dev center. So I think that's probably the biggest asset that Armenia has going for it. But even beyond, I think, the core kind of engineering, what I see is when I talk to people there and I interviewed for different roles, there's just this tremendous hunger, and there's this incredible excitement about tech, finding opportunities to work in tech. They hold Western companies in pretty high regard, and when you look at the level of talent and the potential that's there, and what the cost structure is from a business perspective, it's a very kind of exciting opportunity.
Awesome. Zaré, you've been going to Armenia since 2001, from what I understand, back and forth. You've done various different ventures there. What are your thoughts in terms of biggest opportunities in Armenia for the private sector?
Well, I think I've seen a tremendous growth in all the time that I've gone there. As Vahe says, one of the biggest thing is there's a really eager people to do. There's a can-do attitude, and they want to do, and the youth enthusiasm is huge, and openness to different ideas and solutions. I think that's one of some of the fundamentals that you need to think different and be open if you want to grow and advance in something new. Especially in technology areas, I mean, the sky is the limit if you think that way. Yeah. You just have to, everything else has to be right to get it done. Yeah,
absolutely, completely agree. Just a couple of things to add. I think especially since the Velvet Revolution, as it's called now, there seems to be very strong support or eagerness to support private sector in Armenia on the tech side. So I would say that's definitely a big plus. I personally did over 20 interviews and completely agree. What we call the grit, that's one of the criteria we look for when we interview. Interestingly, most candidates we talk to were off the charts when it comes to grit. And that's something that's very difficult to instill in someone. That you can teach them skills, especially technical skills or other skills, but it's very different to kind of instill motivation. So completely agree. Thanks for those comments. So let's move on and talk a little bit about the gaps. Right, so obviously it's a developing sector. IT sector has been one of the fastest developing sectors in Armenia. However, there are still gaps. What do you guys see as some of the biggest gaps in terms of, if you're a private sector company, you want to invest in Armenia, whether it's you want to invest in a startup or you want to open up an office or location for your company, what kind of keeps you up? What are some of the areas where you're concerned about? So maybe we start with you, Zaré.
Yeah, I think this, you said there are a lot of people, and also one of the gaps is the people also.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to the fundamentals, like people are there, but is not enough. And sometimes you have to go to the roots of the education, what you're learning, what you're coming out is applicable to today's market and today's growth. So I think that area, I've seen progress, but I think there's a lot can be done there. All the way from starting from researchers at universities to all the way from schools, high schools, and not just between educational system overall in private and non-private organizations, the whole fundamental, basically harvesting the power and modes of youth all the way from villages to the cities, that there's a lot can be done. Lack of people is number one. Mm-hmm. That's number one thing that can be done. From government perspective also, the regulations and what can apply. I mean, when you trying to aggressively going after a market that you have a lot of competitors in the world and you want to grow and it's growing much faster in pace of a very high speed, you have to have the flexibility as a company to operate an infrastructure within an environment that there's no prevention of your growth and what you can do. So some of those things I think are fundamentals that needs to be addressed.
Very good. Vahe, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think the number one, probably number 2 and 3 is the aggregate total number of qualified people with the right set of skills. So I think the education pipeline is a problem. It's hard to say the quality of the education is the issue, but in terms of relevance to industry and being able to go from a graduate to a productive engineer or whatnot, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. And then the other thing that was really surprising to me is, and I'm not sure if I'm missing something, but there seems to be a disproportionately large number of economists being produced in the country, and I'm not sure if there's some secret demand that I'm not aware of, but I would say the shift in topics that we're teaching people would be an opportunity. The other area is, if you think about kind of the global market and the ability to recognize opportunities within the market and create a company or jump on an opportunity, Armenia is incredibly small, and I think in many ways they don't have visibility into the business world. And so their ability to, and this is more about startups than about businesses, although it affects businesses too, their ability to see an opportunity, create the right kind of set of resources, and then jump on that is limited because what they see within the country is not really representative of what's out there. And we see that in our case as well when we're interviewing, for us, we live in the home services space, and that's kind of the core market that we serve. And at least in the way that it is here, it just doesn't exist. So we have to spend a lot of time educating and whatnot. And then the other thing is, if you look at the tech sector, it's primarily been driven from kind of firms that are more outsourced, where they essentially take orders from the outside, do something, and then ship it back. And, you can't criticize that or speak against it because that's what was available and that's what they did. But if you're talking for example, from a product management perspective and being able to build the right product, you have to get out of that mindset of receiving an order, building it, and shipping it. And so that muscle just isn't there. So the engineering side is super developed. Anytime they have a target, they can hit it. But understanding where to point the gun is not something that they've just been able to do. So I think it just comes back to the visibility and being able to get access. And if I take a step back, I think that's probably the biggest opportunity that the diaspora has, because we live where the market is. And so if we can figure out a way of strengthening that connective tissue and giving that visibility, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And then going back to the scale problem, I think one of the other big untapped opportunities is women. If we can get a proportionate amount of women as men to go into some of these fields, there's a huge, huge push right now, at least in the US, to focus on this problem, to have more women representation. So I think there's this inherent demand for especially women engineers, women in tech, And for us, just being so small, it makes no sense not to tap 50% of the population to help with the numbers problem. So I think while there are certainly a lot of gaps, the gaps seem very fillable to me. I don't see these as being some intractable problem that's going to be impossible to solve.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm really glad you mentioned that. We're going to come back to that. That's a really good topic. But let's actually pivot, and you touched on this, Vahe, but I want to expand a little bit. Let's talk about what the private sector can do. So we talked about what the gaps are. We talked about what the government could potentially do, right? Especially when it comes to laws, regulations, et cetera. But let's talk about what the private sector can do. Typically, we think about, we can invest, right? We can create jobs. Okay, sure. But what more can we do? When we think about all these areas of opportunity, instead of just sitting back and say, well, these are problems, government should fix it. Let's think about what we can do and what can we encourage other companies to do. So any thoughts there? I think we start with the people, since you both identified people as being, or ready-made talent, let's say, being the biggest gap. Maybe let's talk a little bit about what the private sector can do there. So Sada, maybe you start with
private sector is a lot. I mean, a lot can be done. I think injecting just the capital itself is not enough.
Yep.
I mean, you're talking about some issues that capital doesn't solve. I mean, capital is necessary, and a lot of happening that private sector can do. Get involved in areas of expertise that they have. They can contribute from either partnerships through educational seminars, and become the customer themselves. Even government should become customers of the companies itself. So that's one way of the best you can.
Go after the government as a customer?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think,
Especially military.
especially, I mean, you can't go far. I mean, biggest customer of technology in every year is the government. And so private companies can be also the customers. And there's a lot you can also teach if you want to get involved to do that. So capital is just one. If the problem is multi-legged stool, right? Capital is only one of that.
Right.
So anything that private companies can do, government, they expect government to do, private companies should do. And then they also take some knowledge that they have to the government, try to work with them rather than tell them. And the last but not least, I think, the best is you do it by example. You just get it done.
Yep, love that. Vahe?
Yeah, I think when it comes to talking about the private sector, it's important to, in my opinion, approach it not from a, patriotic, like do good for the country type of a thing. I think that's the wrong approach. If we're going to be able to find scalable solutions, there needs to be a structure in which it's in people's self-interest to do business there. That's why we're there. We're not there to like go on some grand mission to do good. We're there because we see an opportunity to have a business result. And so I think it needs to start there. And this is where having success stories is important. This is where being able to structure, whether it's regulatory or it's giving access to different resources, setting the stage for businesses to be able to win for themselves, I think is really, really important. And then, if we're talking about just like the population here in the diaspora, I think just being engaged and sending the right encouragement. So even something simple as encouraging kids to learn how to code, or encouraging university students to kind of go into tech. It may be small, but you look at, I think the number I heard was every year Armenia graduates something to the tune of like 500 computer science graduates every year. India graduates 1 million every year, okay? So like, there's a problem there. And you can look at the math, and proportionately, even though they have a lot more people, it's still not, it shouldn't be 500. It needs to be way more than that. So I think
economists, more engineers?
Yeah, my vote would be less economists, more engineers, but I'm a biased source. But I think there's something there, and to me, we're so small, we can't afford to just make a bunch of little small bets all over the field and just hope that one of them works out. I think there needs to be a focused effort that's beyond just any one player, whether it's capital, government, private sector, the people. Yeah. I think we just need to focus on one thing and bring our efforts to bear. But it can't be under the banner of, let's make Armenia great again. Yeah. Like, it needs to be something a little bit more tangible. And so it's important for the win to be there. And I think for those of us in a position to place bets and set that example, I think there is a certain responsibility is a strong word, but I think we do need to be the first ones to show that this can be successful, and then to shine the light on it when it does. So one of the things we try to do is bring a lot of visibility to our board, where we've got really brand name investors that have other portfolio companies. So we're trying to show that we can be successful, other companies can be successful, and draw more attention to it. But you've got to go back to the core principles. And so people is a problem. We need to have that be fixed. And we need to have kind of a focused mindset that this is important and this is where we're going to invest energy, mind share, and all that kind of stuff.
So maybe it's, sorry.
One thing I keep in mind, it will take time.
Oh, yeah.
Not overnight, don't rush it.
So actually, it's interesting. I was going to say, Vahe, maybe it's worth sharing some of kind of our ideas, how we're thinking about, especially the people problem, right? Or the opportunity there is, so for example, if we hire someone there, we're going in eyes wide open that we're not going to get ready-to-made talent and get value right away, that we need to make an upfront investment. Whether that's making sure that we're bringing them here and we're providing training, or whether it's getting people from here to go there and spend time. I think that's something that needs to be part of the equation. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there that with some investment up front, you can get huge returns long term, as opposed to just complaining about, oh, well, I have an engineer, but she or he doesn't understand the business concepts, and so I can only limit the work to this, as opposed to actually utilizing that engineer's strength, which is her or his ability to think critically and solve problems. So I think that's really important. Let's actually pivot to talk about some of the bright spots. You mentioned women. I think Armenia, I've heard various different statistics, but the one I was able to dig up actually from a trusted source was that 30% of the tech workforce in Armenia is female, compared to, I think, under 20% in the US. So certainly I would consider that a bright spot. And generally, Vahe, I know you were on a panel a few weeks ago about women in tech, or Armenian women in tech. Let's talk a little bit about that. I'm very curious about your thoughts. You mentioned that 50% of the population can be ignored, et cetera. But in general, what do you think about opportunities for women in tech, whether it's in the US or in Armenia, ideally more in Armenia, and we can go from there.
Sure. I think, to be fair, there are real challenges there, right? Like, we have certain cultural norms that are probably not super woman-friendly. And so it's not to paint this like utopian kind of environment where, oh, it's so easy, just go do it type of a thing. But if we take a step back and we think about, 10 years out, 20 years out, how do we maximize the potential? It's clear that this is one of the big areas where if we get it right, it's going to be a big driver of it. I think what we need to be reinforcing constantly is that there are kind of reasons for businesses and companies to kind of promote this particular aspect and figure out ways of getting more women into the field. But it's a hard topic, and it's something that like we struggle with at ServiceTitan. We put all sorts of efforts in, and we're still only at like 30% in terms of our workforce that are women. So it's not going to be easy, but I think there's definitely a huge potential there. It's just unclear how exactly you go about doing that.
Sure.
Usually, I think that technology in general, especially these days, I mean, that everybody's converging towards the digital technology and software is a gender agnostic, right? I mean, it's like, it's equal opportunity for everyone. But as Vahe said, there is really challenges. Even in the US here, we try to, I mean, it's not that you don't want to, you have a gender issue, it's just lack of candidates when it comes to tracking technology. Now, I think this is where also lies opportunity, that taking the Armenia's opportunity to grow in that area and encourage more people to get involved, more female get involved on the technology side, and to have a job growth. So opportunity is there, and there's nothing to stop getting over the culture barriers should be able to achieve there.
Yep. Thanks for that. And then a few other areas of kind of bright spots, if you will. Maybe I can just cover and then you guys can add. But what we have seen in the last few times we've visited, there seems to be, the ecosystem seems to be developing, and there seems to be some players who are thinking strategically and long term. A few examples come to mind are Hero House, which is kind of a small incubator type thing. They do really good work. Armenia Startup Academy, I've heard about Sevan Startup Summit, which happens in July. I think I haven't had a chance to participate, but from videos and stuff, it looks really both fun and pretty innovative. And then there's a lot of startups that we've seen some success. Any of those that you come to mind that you've interacted with that you would want to share, or any other bright spots that you've seen that you want to touch on?
Well, I think some of the bright spots, other than startups, I think besides startups, it's more encouraging to see bigger, more established companies also go start operation there, not just services as, you know what I mean, like software outsourcing services. That's the traditional model. I mean, other than like ServiceTitan opening office there, like I know other bright spots like VMware, and because you need both elements, right? You cannot just build it with startups, because startups are important, but also you need established companies, so startups, when they fail, can go to established companies can be learning ground for others. So I've seen a lot of now companies think about when it comes to resources to open an office in Armenia, even companies that they might have one or two executives within their company to look at resources. I mean, in our company, we talked about when we're ready to, we are talking about some of the expansion, and Armenia comes up, and so it's becoming awareness of it.
Yeah, some of the other bright spots, I think, I've personally interacted with several people that are living here, that grew up here, that are now wanting to move back. So I think that's super healthy to have circulation, and there's probably...
There's a product manager we hung out with, right?
Yeah, there's been a few. I mean, I spoke to a Google engineer who's looking to move back who's at the pinnacle of tech
today. He was loving it.
Yeah, and so I think that's another big bright spot. And look, like we took, several people from our team that are non-Armenians, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. And like Yerevan's a beautiful place. I think there's a lot that we have going for it that is probably not being utilized to its full potential. So I think one of the other bright spots is it's actually a beautiful place where we should be able to bring some of this talent that we have a gap for from the outside. And at least the early signals that I'm seeing is that potential is definitely there. So that's super exciting to see. And the startup ecosystem is definitely kind of buzzing, and there's all sorts of activity going on. And I think at the end of the day, as Armenians, we're going to have to create the opportunities ourselves. We can't just wait around for people from the outside to swoop in and save the day. So I do think it's super, super important to encourage that, to invest in that. But it's hard to imagine that by itself being able to just take off. You need to have a healthy mix of mature companies, startups, because if you look at, like for example, if you look at Silicon Valley and the way it grew up, a lot of times what happens is you'll have one company that then, has a big success, goes public and whatever, and then from that one company, a whole bunch of other companies spawn out. PayPal is a really great example, the PayPal mafia. Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, like all these guys ended up building huge, massive businesses. And so I think Armenia needs a couple of those where we have a small group of really talented people that see success and then they replicate it over and over. And so the ingredients are there. Now we just need to kind of actually deliver on the
make it happen. All right, I'm going to throw in a couple of personal questions. I gave you guys a heads up in that backstage. But so Vahe, along with Ara, you have essentially started the first Armenian-founded unicorn. We're probably close to $2 billion valuation today. You have deep roots in Armenia. How does it feel? How does it feel to be a founder of a company that is now in a position to, one, kind of lead the way, and two, potentially, make a meaningful impact?
We're still very much in the phase of like, we got to bring it home. So it's hard to spike the football at this point, but it's exciting to think about what's possible. both for ServiceTitan more broadly, and then being able to, personally, what I really want to be able to do with the Armenia project is every person at ServiceTitan has equity, and I'd like us to be kind of a demonstration of what happens when a company goes public to its employees. And so I think that's super exciting, just personally, to be able to think about. And then, us in the tech world, we're kind of inherently almost foolishly optimistic, and so it's hard not to fall into that trap of big thinking and what's possible. But you look at what's happened over the last 20, 30 years, and trillions and trillions of wealth being created from technology, and it's hard not to be excited about what that could mean for a fairly small country and the opportunity that it presents for impact. So I think it's just a super exciting time to be in the field, and personally for us, to be in a position where we can make that impact.
Zaré, so you didn't grow up in Armenia. You started visiting Armenia, started 2001.
Right.
You've been very successful here as an entrepreneur in technology. What kind of pushes you to go back? Why are you here today? What is that driving force?
Well, it's driving force to me. It's always doing something new, different, and grow and change. I
love that you didn't say it's to help or to be patriotic or.
It's the problem is to build, to make something happen, and create something. That's always what's driving me as an entrepreneur. And even if you fail, you get up and do it again. And I see that's what drives me, and I see a lot of things that I would like to go back and even expand my own company there, or even start something there eventually. And just the motivation is there's a lot of positive force out there of the youth and innovation. And Armenia as an opportunity is sometimes when you're coming from area that you want to, technology is going to be everywhere, right? Everybody has a powerful computer in there. I mean, everything is going to get done. Technology is going to be so much advanced. And Armenia has, as a growing country, still not developed yet, right? It's becoming, to become there, you're taking advantage of technology and create and innovate and become a leader and help the countries and people to do that. That will motivate me.
That's awesome. So I think we're running out of time. So I'd like to actually close off with something personal. I think Shushan mentioned this, but so 4 years ago, first Innovate, I'm in the audience. You're on stage talking about technology along with, I think Al Yesayan was there. I see him right there. And Alexis Ohanian was here. Anyway, at the time I was a consultant for PwC doing management consulting for banks. Nowhere near as excited as what I'm doing now. And then I get out of the session, I run into Vahe, whom I knew from mutual friends. We start talking about, he starts telling me a little bit about ServiceTitan. Those conversations, subsequent conversations lead to me joining ServiceTitan, and then 4 years later, I'm here. I've been fortunate to be part of this amazing company and be in a position today, thanks to Vahe and Ara, to be able to make an impact. So I want to pivot that to what can you all do? I think it really comes down to taking matters into your own hands. Ultimately, there are a ton of opportunities, like you both said. Technology sector is going to be the primary driver. And I think there's a lot of people in this audience and in the community that are eager to do something. They don't know what to do. My encouragement is don't wait for anyone to come tell you what to do. Go figure it out. I think there's a ton of opportunity, and you can start with something small. As small as volunteering to teach a course in Armenia when you're visiting, or specifically visit for that, or participate in various different tech summits, etc. There's one happening in October that's put together by Hive. But ultimately, just my advice is go out there and do something. Don't wait. You have your expertise, your potential is needed, and I think you need it more than the country needs it. I think there's more opportunities for you to learn and grow, and that you can make a much bigger impact than you really think. So I want to leave you with that. Thank you so much for the panel. Take for your time. Really appreciate it, and hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.